Death in the other world. When the Pharaohs in the New Kingdom had a religious book describing the other world called Al-Emiduat, which literally means, what is in the other world. This book was also called the Hidden Chamber, and perhaps the tomb itself was meant by that designation. Many copies of Perhaps the tomb itself was meant by that designation. Many copies of the Book of the Other World were found from different regions in Egypt, and the number and arrangement of funeral spells and texts indicates a kind of adherence to the original text without distortion or change. However, this did not prevent the existence of differences from one version to another. From the Book of the Dead among the ancient Egyptians, several books appeared describing the other world, including the Book of the Two Ways, and the Book of the Heavenly Cow, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caves. According to the ancient Egyptian concept, the underworld is divided into 12 hours. The disk of the sun passes every hour through a giant gate guarded by a huge guard snake. In order for the sun to pass through the 12 hours of the other world, the sun boat must know the name of the gate and the name of the serpent that guards it, as well as the magic spell that enables the sun to pass through. It is assumed that the deceased pharaoh is on this boat, and he crosses with the other world with the sun. Then he crosses the world of the living as well, for another 12 hours. Each deceased also had to know the name of the gate and the name of the guard serpent in order for them to pass through the gates of the other world successfully. The ancient Egyptians made the sun 3 states like humans: childhood, youth, and old age. So when the sun rises during the day, it is Khepri the newborn scarab, and at noon Ra the full glowing disk of the sun. And at sunset Adam the old man, or Ufra meaning the meat of Ra, and the explanation is simple. The disk of the sun at sunset is red in color with the color of the meat, and therefore they described it as the meat of Ra. The hope of every deceased person was to be resurrected like the sun, and to enjoy eternity in the other world. And the most important hour of the other world is the 5th hour, which is inhabited by Osiris, and there the trial is held for the deceased, on the basis of which his fate is determined, either a paradise called Al-Iro fields in which he sows and reaps and lives happily ever after, or he falls into the trial and his fate is with the wicked, and thus he goes to hell. The Book of the Dead explains to us in detail how the trial takes place in the presence of Osiris sitting on the throne and in front of him laying the scales with his 2 hands, in one of which there is the feather of justice, or what is known as Ma'at. On the opposite side, we find the heart of the deceased being weighed. If the heart is weighed, the deceased will succeed in crossing into eternity. And also the opposite is true. And we find the deceased, whether a man or a woman, presenting to trial in the company of Horus ibn Osiris in order to intercede for him and extend a helping hand to him. We also find both Gehudi, the symbol of wisdom, and Anubis, the master of the other world, standing to help the deceased pass the terrible test on the basis of which his fate in the other world is determined. The interesting thing is that the ancient Egyptian made the center of work the heart, not the mind. It is as if a person acts from the inspiration of his heart, and that the heart is responsible for the actions of human beings. Does this explain to us what we say to this day when we describe a person as his heart is white? While we say to another that he has a black heart. The success of the trial was a dividing point between annihilation, resurrection, and immortality. Therefore, the ancient Egyptian prepared for it in his life by moving away from injustice and oppression and doing good deeds that bring him closer to the great Creator. It is also strange that the Book of Muslims speaks in more than one place that the center of thinking and decision-making in the human body is the heart. For example, he says, God Almighty said, "And indeed, we have created for hell many of the jinn and mankind. They have hearts with which they do not understand." Al-Araf, from verse 179. God Almighty said, "Did they not walk in the land? And you will have hearts that they are reasonable for them, or ears that they hear about them, for they do not blind, and they will be blessed." Hajj 46. In the first verse, that is, God sends many jinn and humans to hell, and the reason is that they had hearts with which to understand. And in the second verse, he admonishes the unbelievers and says that they have hearts with which they understand, and ears with which they hear, and he completes that it is not the eyes that blind, but the hearts that are in the breasts. My regards. Gamil Shorbagy.